Okay, you are live.
Thank you, Nikki. Good evening, and welcome to a virtual meeting of the City of Dublin Planning and Zoning Commission. The Ohio Legislature passed several emergency laws to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities to conduct virtual meetings. We are currently holding our meetings online and live streaming to YouTube until further notice. You can access the city's live stream on the city's website. We welcome your comments on cases. In order to submit any questions or comments during the meeting, please use the form under the streaming video on the city's website. Your questions and comments will be relayed to the commission by the meeting moderator. Please provide a valid name and address when submitting your comments and refrain from making any inappropriate comments. We want to accommodate public participation and comments to the greatest extent possible. At this time, we're going to pause for Nikki to present the flag, and then if everyone would join me by turning your video on, excuse me, your video off and your audio on as we join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Thank you all. Now, I'm going to turn the time over to Mr. Boone. Could you mute your microphone, please? Thank you. I'm going to turn the time over to Ms. Beal to call roll, and we excuse Ms. Fox from attendance this evening.
Mr. Supelak?
Here.
Mr. Snare? Mr. Fishman?
Here.
Mr. Grimes?
Here.
Ms. Call?
Here.
Mr. Way?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. At this time, we're looking at the documents for this evening. The documents and approval of minutes to accept the documents into the record and approve the minutes from our April 1st meeting. I'm looking for a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Supelak. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Grimes?
Yes.
Ms. Call?
Yes.
Mr. Way?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Snare?
Yes.
Mr. Supelak?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Ms. Beal. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an advisory board to City Council when rezoning and platting of property are under consideration. In such cases, City Council will receive recommendations from the Commission. In other cases, the Commission has the final decision-making responsibility. Anyone who intends to address the Commission on any of these administrative cases must be sworn in. The agenda order is typically determined at the beginning of the meeting by the chair. The rules and regulations of the Planning and Zoning Commission state that no new agenda items are to be introduced after 10:30 p.m. Tonight, there is one case eligible for the consent agenda, and that's case 2, Burger King, located at 6315 Perimeter Drive. Those people, anyone intending to address the commission on any of the administrative cases this evening, could I have you turn your video on? If you could each please raise your right hand and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to this commission?
I do.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. On the consent agenda, is there any desire by the commission to remove this item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to accept.
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Ms. Beal.
Mr. Fishman? Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Snare?
Yes.
Mr. Supelak?
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Way,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. Now, it looks like our next item is an informal case. This is Muirfield Village Golf Club at 8670 Muirfield Drive, case 21-057 INF for informal review. This application is a request for the construction of a new grounds facility and associated site improvements for the Muirfield Village Golf Club. The approximately 3.5 acre site is zoned Planned Unit Development District, Muirfield Village. The site is east of Muirfield Drive, approximately 900 feet south of the intersection with Whittingham Drive. And it looks like we have Mr. Rayburn. Are you here this evening?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. All right. I will turn time over to you.
Thank you, and good evening, commissioners and members of the public. To start us off, I'd like to remind the commission of the informal review process. An informal review provides the opportunity for feedback at the formative stage of a project. It is intended to allow the Planning and Zoning Commission to provide feedback to an applicant regarding the development proposal. As we look at the site, it's part of a larger 36-acre parcel that includes a portion of the Muirfield Village Golf Club golf course, which is heavily landscaped and maintained. The course includes many different water features and streams, vegetation, and mounting throughout the site. 5 existing grounds facility buildings occupy the site in addition to an existing wash pad and associated canopy structure. The site has about 530 feet of frontage on Muirfield Drive, with a single vehicular access point provided from Muirfield Drive, which is highlighted with a yellow rectangle on the screen. Pedestrian access is provided via via shared use path located on the east side of Muirfield Drive. When viewing the site from Muirfield Drive, one can see the shared use path, an on-street bike lane, trees, and mounting. If you squint, you can also see an existing 6-foot wood fence that provides screening from Muirfield Drive. The applicant is proposing to demolish 5 existing grounds facility buildings and construct 2 single-story buildings on the site. A new administration and maintenance building has an L-shaped footprint and is proposed near the southwest corner of the site along Muirfield Drive. A new integrated pest management building is proposed to be located northeast of the proposed administration and maintenance building. This facility will store fertilizers, chemicals, and associated equipment to support operations of the golf club grounds. The existing wash pad and its associated canopy structure will be maintained in the new design. A surface parking lot comprised of 49 parking spaces and 1 ADA accessible space is located to the west and north of the proposed administration and maintenance building. A dumpster pad is proposed along the western edge of the parking area. The existing entry from Muirfield Drive to the facility is proposed to be relocated approximately 160 feet to the north. So if you look where the existing drive today is where the dotted rectangle is, and where they want to move it to is to the north, where the solid rectangle is located on the screen. And so in addition to that, the applicant is proposing mounting and landscaping to infill where the gap would be left behind from relocating entry drive. With respect to building materials, here we have the south and north elevation. It is important to note that with the design and materials that the applicant is proposing, like I said, 2 single-story buildings, but they are pre-engineered metal buildings. The design of the administration and maintenance building will include a stone water table with cast stone and broad aluminum clad windows. In the upper portion of the building is a vertical metal siding in a beige color that's intended to match the other Muirfield Village Golf Club buildings. The roof is proposed to be sheathed in a metal roofing material in a bronze color. And here we have the west and east elevation of the maintenance and administration building. And with the proposed IBM or integrated pest management building, it's proposed to match the administration building, but does not include a stone water table. With respect to the proposed materials, here's what the applicant is proposing with the stone water table and the colors of the paint and other features. It's also important to note that, as I said before, there's an existing 6-foot wood fence and that provides screening from Muirfield Drive. A new wood panel fence and gate is proposed at the new entry drive that is being relocated. And also a new wood fence is proposed to be installed along the western property line to maintain screening from Muirfield Drive. The applicant has not provided details on relocation of the ground sign, which is at the existing entry drive. So that's something that we'd like to see details on in a formal application, as well as how the existing shared use path and the on-road bike lane will be addressed in the final proposal. Staff recommends that the commission consider this proposal with respect to the demolition, site layout, architectural design and materials, and associated site improvements. And listed below, we suggested questions to guide the commission's discussion. Thank you. And also the applicant is here if you would like to ask them any questions, or they're here to answer more questions. That's what I meant to say. Sorry.
No worries. From the applicant, do we have representing this evening?
Jay Boone with Moody Nolan.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Do you also have?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry, Rebecca. There is a host of others that are attending on the design and Muirfield's side. So if you want to go through that.
That would be helpful.
I'll try my best. Chad, Mark with Muirfield, Nicholas LaRocca with Muirfield.
We're here.
Mark Larimer with Moody Engineering, Chet Croce with Moody Nolan. Did I leave anybody out?
Rob with Rosilli.
Rob with Rosilli.
All right. Well, welcome this evening, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Did you have a presentation you'd like to make a statement before we get into the questions and answers?
I can make a brief statement. First of all, thank you for having us tonight. We appreciate the opportunity. And I guess really in the overall picture, what we're trying to do is not only enhance the site, but reorganize and clean up the existing site. Some of the buildings have been there quite some time. They're getting to the point of their life expectancy. So what we're really doing is through architectural aesthetics, the color palette, some fencing, some new vegetation. We're really trying to enhance the site along Muirfield Drive. So we're really trying to keep within the same color palette that's there, and with some of the recent buildings that we've put up recently, with the headquarters building, especially with the windows, the siding and the roof. So we're trying to stay within that same color area. And just lastly, we've tried to enhance the most important sides, which is the west side and the north side, so that anybody coming up and down Muirfield Drive, if they are able to see over the berm and the fence, which they probably won't be able to, we have added the stone there.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. All right, looking to the and Mr. Boone, could I mute your microphone? Thank you. All right, looking to the commission for questions and answers at this point in time. If you have questions let's start with staff, and then if we have questions for the applicant, we can follow up on those. Do we have any commission members who would like to ask questions to staff?
I have a question.
Mr. Grimes.
It appears that there's a significantly lower profile on the new structures over the old, and I didn't quite pick up on the difference in that. Does anybody know how that changes?
between the IBM building and between the maintenance and administration building and then the second building, IBM building?
The new structures versus the ones that are all coming down. I'm just looking at an overall profile. When you're coming down Murfield Road, you can see, as it's the higher buildings, the new buildings appear from the drawings to be lower profile. And as someone said, maybe if you can see over the fence and the trees, how much of the building you're going to see anyway? So that's my question. Elevations change. Roof lines are lower on the new building, right? Anybody?
I'll defer to that.
That's correct. The new, the eave on the new building is around 14 feet with the peak around 18 or so feet, but it is a much lower profile from a slope standpoint. And Chad, do you happen to know about how high the existing building is? It's got to be in the 2022 range. You're on mute, Chad.
You know, I think it's probably in the 22 to 25 range.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank
Grimes,
you.
did that answer your question?
Yes, that's all. Thanks.
I have a question for staff on ADA accessibility. So I noticed that the parking has 49 plus the one accessible parking but from all the ADA standards that I could find, anything over 26 parking spots required 2 spaces. Am I reading that wrong, or is there a special exemption on this due to the nature of it?
That's a good question. Jenny, it looks like you can chime in.
Sure. Honestly, at this point, we did not dig into all the details of that. They would have to meet that as this moves forward. So we would evaluate that when this comes forward for a formal application.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from the commission? Mr. Way.
Yeah, I have a couple. One is I'm not quite clear about, in terms of the fence, what's new, what's staying. I wonder if the applicant could clarify that based on the labels on the drawing. I know they're putting in this new fence at the new entrance, but it says the fence in the back is a proposed fence. And I believe the chain link fence on the south side is staying. So could the applicant clarify how the fence is being impacted on this?
Mark Larimer, if you're out there, do you want to field that? I know that the proposal is to keep the existing chain link on the south side. Mark, are you there?
Yeah. And the remainder of the other 3 sides, I think we show as being replaced right now with the new fence.
There's 2 types of wood fence. There's the existing wood fence that's referred to, and then there's the new wood fence at the entrance, which is a different design than again, I don't know what the extent of the new versus the old design or the old style. Any clarity on that?
So, Mr. Larimer, if I could interpret what you were saying was that the existing fence in the documentation is there for reference, but the proposal includes the keeping of the chain link on the south, but the replacement of the existing wood fence on the other 3 sides with the new design. Is that an accurate recounting?
Yes.
And thank you, Ms. Paul, for clarifying that. That was not, I read in the documents that they were keeping the old design except at the entrance. So the whole fence will be the new design except for the chain link fence at the south. That was a yes. Okay. So I would ask the question, so at a point now where you're replacing the fence and you now have a building that has larger bulk and massing than the previous buildings, it seems like you've got several residences to the south that chain link fence isn't going to really do much in terms of screening those buildings. And I guess I would ask you, why aren't you replacing the chain link fence in addition to the rest of the three sides.
Something we could do.
I think it would be a really nice gesture to the residents live to the south. Okay. Second question is in the narrative, it talks about decorative plants around the west and north sides of the administration building. I see them on the north, but I don't see them on the west side. It appears they're just a sidewalk. And that is I believe that's the front door, right? So as people are coming in and parking, I wonder if you could clarify that.
Chad, can you take what your landscaping plan, can you take on the question for your landscaping plan?
Our
Please.
horticulturalist, Sarah Evans, will match a lot of the existing euonymus and hydrangea that we have at the front gate and at the club entrances, at all entrances of the building. As this is informal, we haven't drawn that landscape plan in yet, but we have had that discussion, and we are going to match a lot of the same plants that we're using around the club. So it mimics a lot of the other areas.
I was speaking specifically about along the building, the new building face on the west side. It's just a sidewalk. On the north side, you have some landscaping. It says the narrative says it's on both the north and west side, but I don't see it on the west side. So I was asking specifically about that side of the new building.
Well, then we'll have to put beds in instead of the sidewalk.
Yeah, if you just push the building to the east, I don't know, 6 feet, you could then have a bed, and you could put. I think it would be really nice as people. I'm sure you have visitors that coming here, right? The vendors or whatever. That it would be nice that those two sides, the north and the west side, are both have some kind of a landscape softening. So again, that's just a comment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, and I also noted that you've got the dumpster pad like right out front of the building, and you've got a huge site, and I was questioning, could you find a better place to put the dumpsters than kind of right? You have to drive by them to get to the front door of the facility.
That's still in discussions. We've actually talked about a location between the IPM center and the wash pad, the existing wash pad.
Okay. And my last question, and I think you probably already answered it because you said you don't have a landscape plan yet, but where the existing entrance is, that cuts through the berm, right? So are you replacing the berm and the landscape?
Yes, we'll move the dirt that we have, the new entrance that's further north, move that dirt down to create that berm so it's continuous. And then we will use some deciduous and some evergreen trees through that area to continue that screening with the fence where there's currently an entrance.
Excellent. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Fishman, did you have a question? You're muted, Warren.
Thad, are you here? Is our city attorney here?
I'm here.
Okay, I asked you a question. I called you. Okay,
Yeah.
no problem.
Yes. So Mr. Fishman contacted me in the interest of transparency. He is a member of the of the Muirfield Village Golf Club. We've also had some other applications from the club come through in the past while Mr. Fishman has served, and as he is not he's not a member of the leadership of the club, having any financial or fiduciary interest in its leadership or operation. So in my opinion, he is able to participate in this discussion, but he wanted to bring that to my attention and bring that to everyone else's attention in the interest of transparency this evening.
Thank you, Thad. Okay. I have a couple questions. Is it okay? All right. Ask them. Okay. Either staff or the applicant. I was kind of surprised when I saw a all metal prefab buildings with low pitch roofs. Actually, in Dublin, generally metal buildings are only allowed in industrial areas, and they certainly were never allowed in Muirfield. The fence, the wood fence, is a 6-foot fence, and when I look back through my information, that was a grandfathered, that small piece of fence there. And in fact, when I was on the board of Muirfield Association, we were not allowed to put by city. I'm sure the city told us a 6-foot fence around the pool. We had to solid fence around our pool. So I'm kind of surprised at that. I guess I'm more surprised at the metal prefab low pitch roof buildings. There's none of those anywhere in Muirfield, and I know being on the board of Muirfield Association, those were strictly prohibited, and the shallowest roof we have, except for in a few small exceptions where they got through, is a 612 pitch, and certainly no metal buildings. So I just kind of want to ask staff, or I was surprised when I reviewed my material yesterday. That's my question.
So staff, can you field the question, have we allowed metal buildings in other areas? What are the exceptions? When has the city of Dublin allowed such construction? And do you have the details surrounding that?
Honestly, not that I'm aware of in this respect. That's why we wanted to have a discussion question with the commission to have them weigh in on this proposal. We can understand that there could be a special scenario with the IBM building, the pest building that has fertilizer and other chemicals in it. Maybe that warrants discussion if that's appropriate to have a metal building there. For the administration and maintenance building, we weren't very supportive of that proposal, so that's why we wanted commission to provide feedback to the applicant, and perhaps the applicant can expand on why they chose those materials.
One follow-up to that is that I know when we built the building in the Muirfield, for the Muirfield Association that stored fertilizer and poisons and so on, we were told that we could build metal, but it had to be cladded with wood, in other words, on the outside. So and also we had to do a 612 pitch minimum, and there's no other. I drove around Dublin. I didn't see any metal buildings other than industrial areas in Dublin, and certainly not in Muirfield. So that's why I was kind of surprised. And the fence, I know I went through that. I was on the association that we weren't allowed to have a 6-foot fence, and we asked about that one on Muirfield Drive, and they said, "Oh, that's grandfathered. We don't even know when that went in." So that was kind of so that was my surprise. So anyway, if somebody could answer that question, I'd be happy to hear it.
So Jenny, do you have the history behind the 6-foot fence?
I don't have a lot of background about how that came to be. Again, I think as similar to the building materials question, it's really more of at the Planning Commission's discretion. There's not a lot of development text requirements that are available for this. So if the commission, it would be within your purview when this comes forward, if you wanted to entertain a 6-foot fence, if you wanted it to be 4, which would be more consistent with how we've handled other even residential and non-residential sites. So that, again, that was partially why we wanted this to come before you as well, to get your input.
Thank you very much. Now, do we have any other questions for the commission, excuse me, for staff or for the applicant, or are we available and ready to launch into some commission discussion? All right, I'm going to focus us. Oh, Mr. Schneer, did you have a question?
I following up on Warren's question. Oh, by the way, is, I guess, full disclosure, I'm also a member, but I won't share my handicap. I would like to hear from the applicant on the decision to use metal. Is it, is it strictly cost-based?
A lot of it with the IPM Center, we're storing the chemicals. We use dispersible granulars, dry, liquid, and when I talk to the ODA about material storage, using wood, using materials that can absorb those chemicals is something that's frowned upon. And so we're trying to be above the cutting edge in the state of Ohio to develop an environmentally friendly building to mix, load, and store chemicals and the equipment, the GPS equipment that we use to apply those chemicals. And everyone we've talked to and consulted with suggested metal as the most economical and safe way to do that. So that's where we went when we started this process.
And was there any discussion on the other building, the more administrative nature building?
We have obviously over $2 million worth of equipment. The equipment is going to be stored, maintained, and serviced in that building. There is an administration wing to that building, but the primary focus of that department is to store and maintenance that equipment. So you have lubricants and repair needs that are going to happen in that building, which is why we've went through and ventilated and set the doors where they are. When you look at, fireproof structures or, fire resistant structures, it was the best option for us to store that equipment in a safe setting and one that made sense from every aspect of the operation.
And if I could just add one last thing, I don't want the tail to wag the dog on this, but the chemical storage building, since we moved to a metal type building on that, we wanted to follow suit in some regards with the administration building from an aesthetic standpoint. We didn't want to change aesthetics in the same complex of buildings. So that's why we chose that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Now, for our reference, we have a lot of the same utilization and a lot of the same uses, equipment, and that sort of thing from a city perspective. Is there anyone on staff who can talk us through the City of Dublin's storage and what our facilities look like, understanding that we're storing the same type of chemicals for our own open space? And of course, we have administrative buildings that also store millions of dollars worth of equipment.
Thinking through for the service center, a lot of those buildings out there they're not a metal building as far as I'm aware. I'd have to look at, and I can look at it while we're talking to see if I can find that out to help inform the conversation, particularly related to the facilities, where our fleet is and what's there, because I would think they would have similar concerns. I'll look while you're talking, and if I find something enlightening, I'll share.
Thank you, Jenny. All right, for our commission discussion this evening, there are 4 considerations. Our standard, are there any other considerations, is number 4, but I want to focus the discussion on these first 3. First of all, is the commission supportive of the proposed site layout and improvements? The second one is if we're supportive of the building design and materials. And then the last one is the proposed relocation of vehicular access and the associated gate and fence details. So I'm actually going to take these out of order. I want to go number 3 first. And I'm actually going to segment it. I'm going to pull it into 2 pieces. The first one is for the vehicular access. Seeing as the questions focused more around some of the particulars this evening and not the vehicular access, and that the applicant has touched on the relocation of the berm. Looking to the commission, are you generally supportive of that relocation of the entrance? And I'm seeing some thumbs. Yes. So it looks like the commission is generally accepting of the berm relocation and that vehicular access relocation. Now I'm going to take the second part of that. I think you heard some back and forth on the fence. The city of Dublin as a whole has not been supportive of 6-foot fences, definitely not solid 6-foot fences. So looking back to the commission, I know that Ms. Rausch gave us the opportunity and the option of looking at a 4-foot fence. And there were some concerns voiced or some questions voiced around the height of the 6-foot fence. Any discussion on the fence itself, generally supportive, the style, I'll even throw that in there, the style of this fence. So Mr. Way, do you want to share on that one?
Sure. So, what the unique part to the site is the berm and the landscape. I mean, it's a very effective screen, and I think that does a lot to help to kind of solve the visual issues of the site. You know, in order to hide cars and the ground level stuff, I think the fence to me is appropriate, and I don't think a 4-foot fence really does it. I think you need to be in the 6-foot range. It's such a unique situation because most people see this from the road, and you've got the berm, which pretty much would hides even a 6-foot fence. So I was actually most concerned about the chain link fence and residential to the south, and having a big new bulkier building, and those people all of a sudden having a different view than they do now, even though it's a chain link fence now. So I was happy to hear that they're okay with maybe expanding the idea of the wood fence. I also was confused a little bit about the design of the fence. I think that the design that's being proposed is actually quite a nice design for a wooden fence. It's better than what was there, and I was concerned they were going to leave the old wooden fence. And then I saw it proposed, and so I'm glad to hear that it's all new in that design, because I think that's a really positive element. I think it's an effective element to screen all of the ground level uses as people either circulate around on the golf course, or visitors come in, or again the residential to the south. So I'm supportive of the fence, and I like the design of the wooden fence. I think it's a softer material. That would be my opinion.
Mr. Fishman, do you want to go next? You're muted.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, I'm puzzled by the fence only because from the beginning of the development of Muirfield, Muirfield is not allowed to have any fences, and I think in Dublin you can't even have chain link fences. Those two things I've seen exceptions in industrial areas. Okay, chain link fences and so on in Dublin, but certainly not in Muirfield. And we don't have an, even though one of these buildings is an industrial building, we don't really have an industrial site. We've got a site surrounded by golf course and 2,800 private residences. So even though the fence is a better design, I think that if we choose to allow that fence, which is a big exception, and I know that the previous one was questioned several times when I was involved with the board. I think as mentioned earlier, it can be hidden by opaque landscaping like pine trees and mounding. I remember seeing a letter from Muirfield from administration when the administration was in charge many years ago that said, we prefer in Muirfield in every case to screen and contain by landscaping rather than fences, because fences get worse as they get older, landscaping gets better. I remember that from many years ago. So that's why I was kind of surprised. Also, I said earlier, I was surprised by the metal buildings because I couldn't find any metal buildings that are in a residential neighborhood. And as far as the safety, I dealt with that because I was on the board when we built the one for Muirfield Association. And you can build a masonry building, you can build a metal building that's clad in brick, stone, wood, or whatever. And the pitch of the roof certainly doesn't affect the safety of the building. In fact, it's probably better. So that's where I have some serious questions. So to answer the question, I'm not in favor of a wood fence that can be seen from the road or neighbor's house. I agree with my colleague that the chain link fence, I think, was not the most appropriate thing in the world previously, but now they're going to be seeing if this went the way it is now, neighbors would be looking at metal buildings, an industrial site through a chain link fence. So I think that mounding and landscaping, it supersedes fences. And so I'm not against it if it's for safety. As I said, there's nowhere in Dublin I know of that you can get a 6-foot wood fence, okay? And maybe I'm wrong, but that's been my experience. So I'm against those things, and I'm certainly against the metal buildings, and I'm certainly against the wood fence. But it's, there's 7 of us here. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Fish. Mr. Grimes, would you like to go next? Lance, you either got incredibly still or we're having connection issues. So, Mr. Schneer, if we could move on to you, and then we'll come back to Mr. Grimes when his connection is a little bit more stable.
Sure. I think that with respect to the fence, the trade-off is due. It's another member here. The trade-off is nobody likes fences, but nobody likes to see what's behind fences, which is why people have fences. The height of the fence should be commensurate with what we're trying not to see. So I don't, given the uses, and I know what's behind there, the 6-foot fence seems fine with me. Landscaping in lieu of a fence would be nice. I would certainly go along with that, but I'm not overly concerned about that. So just focusing on on the fence issue for now, that's my position.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Grimes?
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
I'm in favor of this fence and the design. I'm happy with that. I think continuing replacing the chain link with that would probably be good as well. If they can do some landscaping around that like they do on the other side, you won't see much of the fence.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Suplak. Oh, I apologize. I did not mean to cut you off. Looks like that connection is not behaving itself. Mr. Suplak.
So I think I in large part agree with my fellow commissioners, right? This site is, no matter what the use is, it's sort of quasi-industrial. And if you look at it in its current state, it's pretty raw. So it needs to be screened. I think we can agree on that, especially adjacent to the residential. A fence will do the trick. I don't know that I take issue with a difference between 4 and a 6-foot fence. This 6-foot fence here, regardless of what code says anywhere else, does make a great deal of sense with a quasi-residential or quasi-industrial sort of use sitting adjacent to what it's sitting adjacent to. I agree that, boy, it would be lovely if it could, in lieu of a fence, the screening is in large part vegetative in some way, shape, or form. But I'm not necessarily holding my breath on that. I will take the fence, and I will hope that some of the gaps in the sort of screening, vegetative screening that's already in place might get filled in via this project as well.
Thank you, Mr. Suplak. I'm not a fan of deviating from code and making exceptions because there's one argument for it, because for every argument for, I can propose an argument against. So in the city of Dublin, historically, we have not allowed 6-foot privacy fences. It's a rule, and we've had it, and we've had other people come before and say we shouldn't be subject to that rule because. I think that if we are looking at this from an aesthetic perspective, that a 4-foot semi-private fence for security, flanked by dense landscaping to make sure that the neighbors are screened from the quasi-industrial use of the area, keeps more in the spirit of the Muirfield Village lifestyle. So we are very, very green. We are very dense trees, and we upkeep our properties. And, due to the nature of the actual facility, that being its role and mission in the first place with the chemical storage and everything else, I would be in favor of a 4-foot semi-private fence that is densely screened from adjacent neighborhoods to keep the residential feel of the parcel itself. Understanding that this is a giant PUD and there's some flexibility there, I'd actually like to look at the language of the PUD to see what was drafted originally and allowed in that area, subject to that agreement. So that's where my head sits in relation specifically to the fence. Yes, Mr. White.
I just wanted to pick up on a word you said, Ms. Call, about security. I don't think we've really talked about that. Noting in the plan that there's not only a fence, but there's gates at the entrance. I understand there's a lot of things in this facility that you don't want people to get access to, or kids. I think having a fence that secures this site to keep people out of it when there's nobody else there really watching is a good thing, because I wouldn't want just anybody wandering in there and getting into things that they wouldn't want to. So I don't think a 4-foot fence provides the security that you require to keep people out. And I think keeping people out of dangerous materials is, especially these days, is really important.
Thank you. I mentioned before that for every argument for, I could come up with an argument against. So having, teenage boys, the ability to see into a parcel where the mystery is, it's uncovered. You can see through a semi-private fence and there's no enticement there. I do believe that things ought to be screened and they ought to be secure, and we don't compromise on security. But again, across the city, we have many locations where the wrong kind of access could end in less than optimal conditions. So putting the front fence to the side, I think that due to this being an informal review, I think you've heard kind of the nature of the commission, where we have differences of opinions, and well, we have to count 4, right, in order for something to pass. So looking back to the applicant, I do want to step through this because there are quite a few moving pieces in relation to this review. We touched on the fence and the location. I think that the relocation of the entrance was pretty clear. Does the applicant have any question as to the commission's thoughts around relocation of the entrance?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Boone, then following that up with the fence, understanding that there are a few differences of opinion, do you have any questions you would like to mention in relation to the fence?
I don't have any questions. I'm a firm believer in security as well. So I think that's why we gravitated towards the higher fence, plus the screening attributes of it. So I don't want to be on the fence, and neither do you, but I think I heard what I needed to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Now moving on to building design and materials. Ms. Rauch, I believe that you have some additional information for us. So let's pause the commission discussion and get some information from Jenny.
So the service center is within a planned unit development, and which I think we would all maybe say is very comparable, at least in terms of the use to some extent here. So the development text for that particular site would allow for concrete masonry unit, which is the majority of what the building is, and then it has a metal roof permission as well. So that's what is constructed out there for that building. And then there's also associated buildings with the fleet maintenance that's not within the same zoning, but it has the same design requirements.
Thank you, Ms. Rauch. Looking to the commission, are there any follow-up questions for Jenny before we go to discussion on the proposed design, building design and material? Seeing none, let's jump right in. Mark, do you want to kick us off?
So how about this? A few have probably already expressed discomfort with the current material palette. I'm also among them. That's the first thing that jumped off the page at me relative to these buildings. Even though they are, quasi-industrial, even though they are in large part a service-oriented function to the rest of the club. I mean, they are seated on Muirfield Drive, screened or otherwise, and I would happen to, given that we just surfaced that there are other service centers around the community that are required to be a CMU or CMU material, I would advocate to abide by that here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Mr. Way.
Sorry, couldn't find my mute button. I do understand that these are industrial buildings and they have a certain function, and that there's going to be a lot of activity. I think durability comes to my mind when I think of that, and I think of trucks and equipment and things pushed, hitting into buildings. I think a more durable material than what's being proposed would be appropriate. And I don't want to be, I allow some flexibility about what durability means, but I think there's obviously the aesthetic side of it, but I also think there's a durability, and in this type of environment where it's going to get a lot of abuse. So like the service center, if you go out there and look at that, it looks very durable, at least from the road and the front. And I think this building could definitely, or these buildings could benefit from a material that's more durable.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Mr. Schneer.
Well, I tend to agree. It's hard to find a justification for the metal. I'm particularly influenced by Jenny's comments. If similar use buildings, city buildings, are not constructed of metal, then it would appear that should be the case here. And again, I wouldn't pretend to know what those materials should be, but I think we're seeing a trend here among the commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Grimes.
Well, I certainly think that the new function as the buildings are laid out are benefit of a lot of experience and a lot of years in the business to know what they need. But while functional, I think the form, as has been mentioned, is a little bit lower than what we would like and hope to expect out of this location, not only for the presence and service it gives to the membership, but also to the greater community. So I would think, and I'm sure that if Jane were here, she would like to say the same thing, to raise it above, have it something that looks sharp, worthy of others that may want to do something in the community or in the golf world, to have something that's really a complement to the community and its position within it. So I would say raise the form.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Fishman.
I think it's been pretty much said. I agree with my colleagues' comments. And I will say that you've convinced me pretty quickly about the 6-foot fence. But I hate to see a precedent set, so we have to get around that. But I think if there's a 6-foot fence, as pretty as it is, I think it needs to be opaquely landscaped, so neighbors aren't looking at a 6-foot fence, and especially since they're not allowed in Muirfield, and we don't want to set that precedent. And I don't think 6-foot fences are allowed anywhere in Dublin, but wood fences aren't allowed in Muirfield, and people have gone to a lot of trouble, a lot of expense. The other thing about security, I agree with Muirfield that there should be security, but in this day and age, we have electronic security. If a kid wants to jump a 6-foot fence, they can jump a 6-foot fence. And if you have teenagers, you know that, okay? And the fancier one's even easier to jump because you got something to put your foot on. So I think that my only objection is the same as our chairman's, and that is that whenever we start deviating from code, we set a precedent. So that's my worry. 4 foot to 6 feet doesn't really bother me, but I think it should be landscaped opaquely so we don't see it, because if we have to have it, because they're not allowed. Okay, and we've already talked about the building. My reaction was just like my colleagues when I saw it. I thought, I'm on the wrong case maybe, that they would put a metal building with a shallow roof in Muirfield, which is it's disallowed. So that's my comment. But even though I said it's already been said, I guess I said it again. So, thank you.
And I echo Mr. Supelak's comments in relation to the building to a T. So the last item on called out for discussion is the site layout and the improvements. So I'm going to segment those improvements into both building but also site improvements. So Mr. Way did a good job kind of introducing the landscaping portion and the shifting of the building to allow for a little bit more landscaping. So I'd like to hear from the commission on the proposed site layout, the L-shaped building and the ancillary building, along with those site improvements that we've looked at, understanding that we've discussed the fence already. So looking to landscaping and the overall site improvements. And then just because I introduced it before with the ADA compliance, anything that would need to be covered because of code, we can kind of set to the side as this is informal review and just focus on those site improvements and the layout of the proposed building structures. So let's go, Mr. Fishman. Let's just go in reverse. Mr. Fishman, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I pretty much, I think that's been said too. I think that with regarding the fence with landscaping, I think that, and in other parts of the course, by the way, Muirfield's done a great job. The course done a great job in opaque landscaping where you wouldn't be, they can do that so you wouldn't see a fence. But also I agree that we should, Mr. K, that we should move the building and make sure we have landscaping. Muirfield has preached for over 40 years, landscaping, mounding. So I don't think there's any reason when you're building a facility like this, that it should be less. Okay, so I think the landscaping should be outstanding, as Muirfield's proven they've done before. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Mr. Grimes?
I'm supportive of the layout and the improvements. There's nothing more to add for me.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Schneer?
No, I'm supportive as well.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Supelak?
I'm supportive of the layout.
And Mr. Way?
I think the maintenance building and the admin building is appropriately oriented on the site. I think it responds to the street in some form or fashion. My only concern is the maintenance building, again, because it's now bigger and bulkier than the existing one, is I feel like it's pushed up a little bit too much to the property line to the south, and especially because you have the residential uses there. I would like the applicant to explore maybe pushing it further to the north and getting some more space around it to the south. If there's truck activity, it looks like it's going to be pretty tight anyway, and so that might help their circulation of the site. The L-shaped, I think what it does is it actually creates that yard in the center of the site, and it helps to screen the yard activity from surrounding uses. So I think that organization makes sense. I would like to see it pushed further to the north. And I comment a little bit on landscape, but we don't really have a landscape plan to comment on. So I want to make the point that I think the frontage on Muirfield is successful because it's a fence, a berm, and landscape. And I think those three components reinforce each other. I would like to see more, and I think this has been said by others, of more combination of landscape and fence on the other edges. And if there's some berming opportunities with that too, but I think it's not just the fence that you would rely on, but you need the landscape. Certainly, you know, I take a wood fence and it as an element in the landscape. I can see those concerns without landscape, but if you put landscape with it and appropriately, it can be a nice kind of element. So I would encourage the applicant to start thinking about how landscape helps to soften the fence that people are concerned about, and creating just a better perimeter to the site.
All right, I am also generally supportive of the layout. I do echo Mr. Way's comments about the adjacent properties. And so shifting that building to the north, I would be in favor of as well. But other than that, I believe that all of the comments have been covered. The only thing to add is I think you heard it echoed by each commission member throughout. We know that Muirfield can do landscaping, and we know that Muirfield can do landscaping incredibly well. And so we are looking to see more of that as this application goes through the formal processes. And we expect that working together, we can come up with something that is complementary to Muirfield and Dublin as a whole. So looking back to the applicant, on these last couple of items, the site layout improvement and the building design and materials, do you have any questions based on commission discussion and this informal review?
I did have a couple of comments and a question, yes. On the site, I think we provided you with information, the existing, actually the new buildings on the site plan, on the survey, with the old building that shows up underneath it. And I'm just looking at it here on my computer. The new building, my point is the new building's actually further north than the existing building by several feet. So we've already pushed it a little further than what's existing. And then I wanted to go back to item number 2 real quick, because you know, I think everybody knew that this was going to happen. We've got two opposing forces. You want to hide the building with a fence, whether it's a 4-foot or a 6-foot fence, so that you don't see it. But on the other side, when you don't actually see it, you want to beautify it with stone and some other materials, when we're trying our best to make the building a background building and go away. So my question is, I think we can deal with some of the aesthetic issues. Would the committee be in favor of addressing with either stone or concrete block only the west and the north faces of the administration building, which is really the only faces you're going to see, as opposed to going around the entire building?
So I'll look back to the commission for that. Starting off as an individual contributor, I can see perhaps an argument for the building that contains the storage that is more functioning like a shed. I can maybe see an argument for an exception to the materials in that building, but for a building that is administrative in nature, even if it has an ancillary use for something else, my feeling is that it ought to be held to the standards of the rest of the administration with something else uses throughout the city. So looking then to the rest of the commission, let's go with Mr. Fishman. I got a thumbs up. Mr. Way?
I just want to clarify. I think the applicant talked about stone. I don't think we stipulated stone. I think masonry was the material that Jenny mentioned. So I'd look to the applicant to come back to us with, you know, a material that's durable and is of masonry, some kind of a masonry. And I'm not a big fan of one side versus the other side. I think the whole building should be treated equally. And I even think the IPM building, because it's right at it's the first building you see, I wouldn't give that a break either. I think if you're going to make a statement and you're going to go with masonry, then all the buildings should be treated equally, all sides.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Mr. Suplak?
I think I agree with Mr. Way. I I think if the standards are in place for other sort of these other sort of provisional service areas, I think they ought to apply. And again, there are masonry units that can tolerate the sort of chemical situation that is the ICM building. Excuse me. Um, so I'm not yet willing. I could be convinced otherwise in future versions of this if the design is worthwhile, but I'm not yet willing to grant a backside relief on the backside.
Thank you, Mr. Suplak. Mr. Schneer.
I agree with, I think we're all saying the same thing.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Grimes.
I agree as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Now back to Mr. Boone. Do you have any clarifying questions?
No, ma'am, I do not. I don't know if anybody from the Muirfield side, Chad or Nicholas, if you guys had any questions.
No, thank you. No, thank you.
All right. Well, gentlemen, we certainly appreciate your time this evening. And look forward to seeing this proposal in future iterations. We hope that the clarity that we offered is helpful. We are looking to maintain the look, the feel, and the high level of quality that Muirfield has come to offer the city. So thank you for your time this evening. It is very much appreciated.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right. Ladies and gentlemen. Looks like our next case is Germain Honda Phase 4 at 6715 Sawmill Road, case 21-031 FDP for a final development plan. This application is a request for exterior and site modifications for an existing car dealership. The approximately 12.5 acre site is zoned Bridge Street District Sawmill Center neighborhood and is southwest of the intersection of Sawmill Road with Dublin Center Drive. And Nikki, it looks like you have our case presentation this evening.
I do. Good evening. Okay, as mentioned, this is a request for review and approval of a final development plan for Germain Honda Phase 4. The site is located within the Bridge Street District and zoned Bridge Street District Sawmill Center neighborhood. The final development plan is the third step in the three-step development process. You'll note that this site is developed today as an automotive dealership. Under the recently adopted Bridge Street District amended final development plan provisions, in the future, this application would be eligible for an amended final development plan. However, those procedures were not in place, and therefore this applicant has followed the three-step process. So the commission has seen this a number of times before, both in 2020 and 2021. So here's the approximately 12-acre site, which is located on the west side of Sawmill Road, immediately south of the intersection with Dublin Center Drive. This site is today a single parcel, although was originally several parcels with several different uses, including a gasoline station, real estate offices, as well as automotive sales. These are some existing site conditions. This is the existing site condition along Sawmill Road. This is looking both north and south along Sawmill Road. You'll notice here a generous setback from the right-of-way, which is proposed to accommodate future pedestrian connectivity. These are the existing conditions along Dublin Center Drive. Dublin Center Drive curves along the north and west portions of this site. So here you'll see on the left-hand side of your screen, the northern leg of Dublin Center Drive looking west. In the middle of your screen, you'll see the Dublin Center Drive curve looking south, and another portion of Dublin Center Drive, which is the straightaway on the west-hand side, also looking south. Here are some existing conditions of vehicle display across the site, with the new car store on the left-hand side of your screen and the used car store on the right-hand side of your screen. Additionally, for your reference, the existing character of the new car store is shown here. You'll notice that the existing structure is IFAS, which is painted in a soft beige with blue-gray accents, as well as stone veneer. This is the existing condition of the used car store. You'll see here the predominant form is the pyramidal structure, which is a building addition to the main brick mass to the rear. So a bit of case history, as this is an application that city staff as well as the Planning Commission have been working on for a number of years. The first two phases of this application in 2018 and 2019 were reviewed and approved by the administrative review team. Phase 3 was actually internal work only, which did not require any commission or public review process. The 2020 and 2021 applications were seen before the commission, and the proposal tonight is extremely consistent with what has previously been submitted to this board. So a quick overview, the site modifications include access, vehicular circulation, and pedestrian connectivity, parking, as well as lighting, and landscaping, tree preservation, screening, and vehicle display, as well as those building modifications. So phase 4 implements a number of approvals that were identified with phase 2, including the closing of an access point along Sawmill Road, with the addition of an access point along Dublin Center Drive. Parking lot modifications are also proposed with phase 4. You'll see on the site plan, the pyramidal form on the used car store is proposed to be demolished. This accommodates additional on-site parking. The demolition of that portion of the used car store creates a condition with a larger building setback from the right-of-way, which is inconsistent with the development regulations of the Bridge Street District. Therefore, a waiver is required to the building type standards. Given the existing site layout, which is remaining the same, as well as the continuation of the existing use and a desire to optimize parking on the site and eliminate off-site vehicle storage, which does occur, although is not permitted, staff is recommending approval of that waiver. Additionally, sidewalk connections are proposed to be provided along Sawmill Road, a portion of Dublin Center Drive along the north side, and a portion of Dublin Center Drive along the west side. You'll notice here that no sidewalk connection is proposed to be provided along the Dublin Center Drive curvature. This is an item that both staff, the applicant, and the commission have struggled with over time, given a desire to prioritize tree preservation while also recognizing a need to meet the goals and objectives of the Bridge Street District Code to provide pedestrian connectivity to the maximum extent possible. A waiver is required to permit this configuration without a sidewalk connection along the Dublin Center Drive curve. The reason there is no sidewalk in this location is given the significant mounding, regrading of the area, as well as significant, if not total, tree removal would be required, which would significantly alter the character of the site. Additionally, parking modifications are proposed. The applicant is requesting approval of a parking plan this evening. The Bridge Street District is dissimilar from the district that this site was originally developed in. That being said, the Bridge Street District has both minimum and maximum parking requirements. Given the continuation of this auto-oriented facility, and as mentioned, the desire to provide as much on-site vehicle storage as possible, staff is recommending approval of a parking plan. This parking plan distributes vehicle spaces across parking spaces, which include visitor, employee, and service spaces, inventory spaces, which are unmarked spaces, allowing for compact inventory storage, and finally, display spaces. A total of 1,063 vehicle spaces are proposed. Previously, parking plans have been approved that permitted up to 1,016 spaces. A number of landscape modifications and enhancements are proposed for this application. Perhaps the most notable is the new car store and vehicle display. You'll see here the new car vehicle display along with conceptual renderings of the implementation of the landscape details, which include grasses, lilacs, hydrangeas, honey locusts, and dense yew shrubs. The intent of the landscape design for this site is to provide maximum screening of vehicular use areas while providing select view sheds for vehicle display areas. Staff is conditioning that the dry laid stone street wall be increased in height from 30 inches to 33 inches. This will allow for full screening of the vehicular use areas, as this stone wall is not intended to screen the vehicle display areas. Site lighting is also proposed with this application. Phase 2 modified interior landscaping, parking lot configurations, as well as site lighting. The site lighting proposed with this phase is intended to be consistent with the LED site lighting previously approved. The applicant should continue to work with staff to ensure that the lighting uniformity standards are met, as well as ensuring subdued lighting levels along Sawmill Road, consistent with the aesthetic character of Dublin. The new and used car vehicle store character remains the same as the preliminary development plan. You'll see here the building material on the new car store remains the same as today, however, will be repainted alabaster white. A new architectural drum feature is proposed to be installed. This drum is consistent with the Honda brand, however, is clad in a silver metal panel, which is the alternative design to the blue drum, which is predominant across the Honda brand. For the used car store, with the removal of the pyramidal building addition, the used car store will mimic the new car store in a similar color and design, including storefront windows and datum pattern. In detail, the materials are displayed here. The commission may recall that with previous iterations, signs were proposed for this building. The applicant has indicated that additional time is necessary to explore the final design of those signs to address commission comments. Therefore, a master sign plan will be coming before the commission at a future date. 2 waivers are recommended for approval this evening. The first to the walkability standards, the second to the building types for existing structures. Also, approval of a parking plan and a final development plan with 4 conditions. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, the applicant team is here as well this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. And who from the applicant is here this evening?
Hi, I'm Dustin Todd with Arch All Architects. I'm also here with Tom Hart from Isaac Wilds and Greg Crobot, our landscape architect.
All right. Mr. Way, do you want to start us off with questions?
Yeah, I had a question for staff about the raising the stone wall from 30 to 33 inches to hide the vehicle display area. Nikki, could you go to that graphic and tell me, or a graphic that I'm trying to, so part of the stone wall sits on top of concrete, so it's only a 1 foot 6 inches right now. That's where the car display area is. So I'm trying to figure out, where are you getting the 33? Is that from the sidewalk at below?
Yeah, so I'm happy to pull up that graphic, and I will in just a moment. That graphic in the presentation is for the vehicle display area, which would not be screened by the 33-inch tall wall. That, as shown, would have a lower profile to ensure those vehicles can be displayed. The 33-inch tall wall are the walls that accent the curvilinear sidewalk, which extends along Sawmill Road. Those walls are strategically placed with landscaping between in order to fully screen the vehicular use area, which is the area that's defined for either parking or vehicle storage. I'll pull up that graphic.
Yeah, well, thanks for that clarification. So I thought you said it was to hide the vehicle display area, and I was going, no, that's not going to happen. So you've clarified that for me, I think. So that wall would remain as it is in the presentation, right? At 1 foot 6 inches, I think it is. The second question I had was related to the bollards. It's real there. I couldn't really find a plan that actually showed the layout of the bollards in relationship to the wall and to that display area. Other than the landscape plan, which is really small, but so I assume that they just sit on the inside of that stone wall on the vehicle display area. Is that right?
I'll defer to Greg Crobot, who's their landscape designer.
Mr. Way, originally when we designed those display areas, we included bollards with chains, and staff didn't care for that condition, and so we removed those chains. That's where the 1 foot 6 inch wall height was added on top of that display area.
Okay, and the purpose of the bollards, they're really lighting bollards. They're not there to prevent cars from moving or whatever.
You are correct. They are there for illumination. That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And one other question, this is in the materials page. It references the mullions being the storefront being clear anodized, and it shows a white mullion, but all the renderings show black mullions and are labeled that SF1. Verify, are they black or are they the clear anodized?
No, the intent would that it be clear anodized to match the existing.
So the rendering, like on the elevations on A12 and A14, which show black, that's going to be actually the silver, like basically silver color, right? Which is what is on the front, right, of the building. Is that right?
Correct. I apologize. That's a line weight issue. That the intent would be that it's clear anodized.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. And again, back to the walls, the renderings show the curved wall around the display area as this segmented kind of wall. And with a dry laid, that should be able to make it a smooth curve. Is that the intent? And it's just a a rendering issue?
Yes. Yeah, the intent said it would be a smooth curve.
So all the walls will be smooth curved as opposed to the renderings, which shows segmented, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. That's all for now.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Any other questions from the commission? Seeing none. If we want to go into discussion, we've seen this, as staff pointed out earlier, we've seen this quite a few times. So looking to staff to verify that any public comment, has any public comment been received since the start of the meeting?
We've had no public comment on any application tonight.
All right. Now, looking to discussion. Anyone have discussion items? I know that staff touched on the struggle with that connectivity. The last time we saw this, I know I was one of the ones who voiced I wish there were a way for us to get that sidewalk in there. We have too many places throughout the city where we didn't balance very well the need for connectivity with the need of open space. We do open space really, really well, but sometimes at the cost of connectivity. Around this particular area, we've seen during the winter times when snow is piled high, pedestrians having to trudge through snow because there is no walk to shovel to allow for clear, safe walking paths. So I think that the addition of the pedestrian ways where we could put them in is wise and helpful. I wish there were a way that we could get it in that corner and allow for safe pedestrian walkway there. But I know that that is a challenge, and balancing the tree preservation and the open space preservation along with the connectivity has proven more difficult than first expected. Any other commission discussion? Mr. Way.
And I apologize, I'm a new commissioner, so I get a bit of a bye of not being involved in the earlier discussions, but it just strikes me that we have these sidewalks that come up to these driveways and they stop. So what does a pedestrian do when they've been enticed to walk down the sidewalk? And I'm not even, you could even consider if I'm in a wheelchair, do I go back or do I cross the road to get to another sidewalk, which I don't see there's sidewalks there either, but I'm sure you've all had this discussion. And it just strikes me as an issue.
Yeah, one of the items that we've discussed in the past, and you're right, you don't have the benefit of having the previous discussion, but we definitely don't hold that against you. We've all been there. We all joined a commission that had already gone down the road quite a while. So we did talk about in the parcel itself, there obviously is some flat surface. The ADA complexity does obviously add some complexity to that. We also talked about different locations in the city where, so the one that came to mind was Avery Muirfield and Perimeter Drive, where you approach the stoplight coming from the Crawwell community, the Giant Eagle Shopping Center. You approach the stoplight, but there is no crosswalk on that side of the street. And you have to cross the street to the north, cross the street to the west, cross the street to the south to get where you needed to go. And so it's the three crosses. And looking at this from a planning perspective, eventually we will redevelop this parcel. Hopefully Honda stays for a very long time. You're happy, you're fruitful, and business is great, but eventually we will get to, just like everything has a life, we will get to the end of this particular parcel being used for this. And during that redevelopment process, that would be prioritized. However, it would be difficult to have that applicant put in all of the sidewalk and kick the can further because, again, Nikki touched on this, didn't used to be one parcel. And so in the future, it could be subdivided. So looking at the best we can do right now was putting in these stretches of sidewalk. So Nikki, looking to you, is there any clarification or any correction that needs to be offered based on that history?
Yeah, no, I think that was very comprehensive. I mean, I think, Kim, you make excellent points, and certainly something the applicant has struggled with is some of these sections of sidewalk are not connected to anything, but someone has to be first, and the scope of site modifications and building modifications here is extensive, which triggers compliance with the Bridge Street District Code, which is, why we have pursued this to the greatest extent possible with this applicant, particularly on the north side of Dublin Center Drive. It terminates at a T intersection. There is no additional connectivity, but at least there would be some predictability if you did have to cross in an unmarked area. The only other connectivity point is at the intersection of Dublin Center Drive and Snoffer with Sawmill. There is a pedestrian crossing across Sawmill Road. So that would now be accessible, as would the Coda bus stop that is along this property's frontage.
Thanks for the history, and I was obligated to say something because I would hope that maybe the city council could take this on as an issue, help complete the link. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Looking back to the commission, any further discussion? Looks like we have a few items for motions this evening. We do have the request to approve 2 waivers that have been endorsed by or recommended by staff. We have a second one for the parking plan and the final one for the final development plan with the 4 conditions. So going back to, if we could do the waiver, the 2 waivers requested to install pedestrian facilities along the perimeter of the site and to modify the used car building, eliminating the building addition.
So moved.
So looking for a motion from the commission.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Ms. Way,
Yes.
Mr. Suplak.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. Number 2 is for the parking plan. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. A second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Way,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Suplak,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. And finally, on the final development plan, we have 4 conditions. If you'd like to take a moment to review those. And when ready, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Way,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Suplak,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer.
Yes.
Thank you again, Ms. Beal. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining with us this evening. We are looking forward to seeing the improvements here. They are vast, as Nikki, I was going to call you Jenny, Nikki. As Nikki pointed out, these are significant improvements. The connectivity is always appreciated. The aesthetic improvement is appreciated, and we're really looking forward to seeing those highlighted cars on that front curvilinear path. So thank you very much for joining and spending your Thursday night with us this evening. We certainly look forward to seeing the improvements.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commission. We'll see you soon with the master sign plan.
All right. That sounds great. Thank you, and you have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.
All right. Next up on our agenda are historic design guidelines and administrative request, case 18-037 ADM. This application is a request for a review and recommendation to City Council for new historic design guidelines applicable to properties located within the Architectural Review District and its outlying historic properties. And Nikki, it looks like you have this one as well this evening.
I sure do. So I do not have a PowerPoint presentation for you this evening, but I do want to take a moment to walk you through some of the modifications that were made since the Commission last reviewed this document. As you may recall, this is coming to you with a recommendation of approval from the Architecture Review Board. This document is almost 4 years in the making and is the culmination of many thoughtful bodies of work, including a stakeholder task force, which began in 2018, followed by engagement of the Architecture Review Board, as well as members of the community at a number of public meetings in 2019 and 2020. So at the first review of this document by the Planning and Zoning Commission, a number of items were highlighted as opportunities for improvement. The most substantive modifications to this document occur in the natural features section. This section of the document provided an opportunity to highlight additional natural features related to the landscape that contribute to the character of the district. So we've all talked about, trying to hone in on what makes historic Dublin unique. And part of the development pattern is actually the lack of development and the open spaces between structures and the agricultural upbringings of the community. So highlighting that, as well as some outlying historic properties and features, including the earthworks. The second most substantively changed section were the site design standards. The site design standards identified some opportunities to ensure that sites were laid out in a manner that was sensitive to the topography, including view sheds and open spaces. And then finally, some clarifications and rephrasings were made in the new construction section, as well as the commercial storefront design section, and other very minor technical adjustments. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that the Commission may have. We are seeking a recommendation of approval to City Council to adopt this document as a resolution, which is really the companion to the recently effective Historic Dublin Code.
Thank you, Nikki. All right, looking to the Commission for questions for Nikki at this point. I have one if I want to kick us off on a small one. So within the site design, 6.4A says original stone walls and fences should be retained and should not be modified in any way. Modified to me just means changed. And so if something, I buy a property and there is an original stone wall, but it's broken, to fix it is a modification. And so I wonder if there is, if the spirit is, don't change it, don't alter the effect of the wall, but keep it in good repair. To me, I don't want people to say, well, code says I can't modify it, so I can't fix it after it's been crashed into because I live along Dublin Road.
Yeah, so I think the intent behind that word choice was in Historic Dublin, we place a lot of weight on maintenance, and a difference between maintenance and a modification. So if something were to deteriorate over time, we would encourage somebody to maintain that. But particularly with these stone walls that are among the most historic, to do that in a sensitive way. The reason that that language was tightened up was to ensure that there was no lack of clarity about whether or not these walls could be interrupted or truncated or anything to that effect. But I certainly see your perspective on that, and I think we could change it to altered. Should not be altered in any way. We'd have the same general meaning.
Thank you, Nikki. Yep, Mr. Schneer.
I wanted to pick up, and I have another point as well, but I agree. It bothered me. It's almost reading like this, several classifications. There's original is A, historic is B, and that there were different classes and they should be treated differently. I'm not sure that was the intent. Tough to wordsmith, on the fly. I like altered better than modified, but to Rebecca's point, we do want them maintained. We want them repaired, and maybe another clause, should not be altered in any way, but should be maintained. You could read, if I have one, if you have one of these walls, you don't know whether A takes precedent over C, degraded walls should be rehabilitated. So I got one of these walls, hypothetically, I don't know what to do with it. Because if I repair it, I do agree, any change could be construed as an alteration. So maybe inserting something in A.
So, Mr. Schneer, to the point of wordsmithing on the fly, it's not my favorite thing. However, I would offer up, if we, in that first clause, original stone walls and fences should be maintained and retained and should not be modified in any way. Calling out that they're maintained and retained, but they're not altered. And I actually do like altered better than I like modified.
Yeah. And it rhymes. Can't be any better than that. I like that.
Mr. Way?
Could you just add at the end, modified in any way from its original form? And that way that covers it.
Yeah, the only immediate call out that I would have is, how do I know that it's its original form? It's right now it's current. I just bought the property. I don't know if it's its original. I do know that it's its current.
Yeah, I would just, interject that, right, historic Dublin is a very small geography, and there are not that many residential outlying properties. So, staff does work hand in hand with all of those property owners. The historic and cultural assessment actually assesses every stone wall in the city of Dublin that is of age to be contributing. So we do have resources to identify who owns which types of walls. And I think, to Mr. Schneer's point, the hierarchy and some of the nomenclature in that stone wall section is supposed to get at the fact that there are different types of stone walls. You would be welcome to modify or maintain a wall that was built in 1985 if it was built to emulate a historic stone wall that was not actually historic. So, we would coach people through that, I guess, because it is daunting, and how would you know otherwise?
Now, Mr. Schneer, we somewhat cut you off there. So if we want to go back.
Well, no, I'm fine with the modification. I did have another question, and I thought we talked about this before. The guidelines, well, the Architects Review Board does not have authority over residential landscaping, correct?
That is correct.
So are we suggesting that are we suggesting that the guidelines are broader, are intended to be broader than the purview of the ARB?
Yes.
Or, okay. The syntax, it bothers me that, well, I will raise the point. So could the staff, could we come back, or could the ARB, could somebody come back, could the city come back to a residential owner in the historic district on something they did with respect to landscaping that was not consistent with the guidelines? Right. In other words, what would be the authority to do so? Or would the staff's position be, well, you should have, it was only a guideline and you didn't follow it, but we have no authority over that. It just bothers me, I guess. And how do you reconcile that?
Yeah. So really the intent of some of those site design recommendations is particularly when we're looking at, site redevelopment. So, new single family custom homes. If a home could be sited to preserve a tree, it would be the strong desire of the community, the Architecture Review Board, that home be sited in that manner. The guidelines do supplement the code, but do not carry a legal weight that there would be a repercussion or a follow-up on a property owner subsequent to development. So these would be recommendations. Perhaps, Thad, could you chime in?
Yes, that's exactly right. And in the section of the code that talks about ARB putting together historic district guidelines, it says that they are there to concern conservation of sorry, I have two screens up here, so I'm reading like behind here. Concerning the conservation of the historic areas, buildings, and resources. They are considered in the board's decisions, but can be broader than the subject matter that the board would make orders on. So they're there to be a resource for the conservation of that historic area and its character, but as Nikki said, not necessarily and not at all in the case of residential landscaping, something that would be enforced with the force of law.
Well, yeah, it still bothers me, and here's why. And it reminds me of your example, Nikki, and I think it came up in one of the previous meetings that somebody wants to build a new home and has a big tree, and the plan is to get rid of the tree. Nobody really wants to get rid of the tree, in theoretically, but the ARB says we don't want you to get rid of the tree, and their only way they can only cite the guidelines, but the guidelines are just guidelines, and it's messy, it's muddy, because that person presumably would have, all things being equal. I mean, the ARB could find some other reasons, perhaps, but they could get rid of, or somebody right now could, the historic Dublin could, there's big trees on South High. Somebody could just take the tree down and, what do you point to? Go ahead.
If I can piggyback on that, the stated, if you look at the very beginning, the overview, the last sentence of 1.0, the guidelines supplement the review standards contained in the code and will guide the ARB in determining if requests for approval by the ARB will be granted in accordance with the code. So I think what we're struggling with is the code is what is required. We've always talked about the code as the minimum requirement. If everything meets code, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is 100% approved if 4 planning commission members interpret the code to mean something different, and 3 determine that yet. So it's always in the majority case, but I think what we're struggling with is this document is going to guide the ARB into approving or denying the application, but in addition to the code, but it's not code. I think that's the struggle.
And I, I think we're all okay, we're all okay with the guidelines as they sort of provide some support, guidance, et cetera, to applicants and the ARB when they're in concert. But where there's a section, that talks about residential, but they don't have authority over residential. And I'll stop this harangue. Thad, I mean, if you're not bothered, I'll give up on this. But it's particularly when it calls out, the implication is in several of these places, it applies to residences when in fact it cannot apply to residences.
So I would add one thing, which is, I can certainly appreciate, and one of the things we've definitely tried to do along the way is to make sure these documents are in sync with one another. I think that these documents are not in conflict. The guidelines are just potentially more specific about how the Architectural Review Board could administer their site design review for residential properties, because it so closely aligns with the values of the community. So they're not, I guess I would encourage us to think that they're not conflicting with one another. The guidelines are just expanding upon something. And the way that these 2 documents are tethered together is with the review criteria. So in the code, the review criteria cite that the guidelines must be met. And so that is the mechanism by which the Architectural Review Board could consider the guidelines in their review. But I think, Lance, potentially to your point, say a homeowner comes through and does a residential landscaping project many years or even 6 months subsequent to the construction of their home. That's not subject to an application before the Architectural Review Board. Therefore, the guidelines would not be consulted unless it were the desire of that homeowner to consult them. And I guess to Thad's point, we would certainly never go back and enforce on guidelines because they're not an enforceable document. They're just a guiding document. So Thad,
that's a good point.
Yeah, you articulated, I think, the example better than I did, Nikki. And I'm trying to think of I think that puts it very well. That if somebody wants to put in a new flower bed next to their house, that is not something that ARB would ever see. Because it's not actually a change in the structure or the architecture of the house.
Thank you. Any other
Thank you.
discussion items? Did anyone see anything that they'd like to question or discuss? I appreciate the progress on the document, especially as most of us, excepting Kim and Mark, are not planners nor architects by profession. The styles, the Italianate versus the French versus the everything type of style, that architectural section is very helpful as we're looking at these buildings, and even just understanding if something could be historic. to be able to identify what we're looking at and building that, the planning acumen that we need to get stronger and stronger at as a commission to ensure that we're doing the best job that we can do for the city of Dublin. So I appreciate this is representative of many, many, many hours of work, and so that is certainly appreciated. Any other, Mr. Way?
I just wanted to echo those comments. You know, I wasn't part of this process directly, but as chair of the historic had similar conversations through that process. And I think this is a great document and a great guide for the community to think about how things should be done properly in the historic district. So I applaud everybody that's behind this. And I think, you know, the problem with his design guidelines is you can nitpick the words to death, right? And everybody's going to have a different. I think you have to look at it from the big picture, and you know, does this give people a sense of what we're trying to achieve? And I think in looking through it, I think it's a really great document, and I think it gives people a lot of direction. So hats off.
All right, just crossing T's and dotting I's. Nikki, making sure that no public comment has been submitted as during the course of our discussion on this item.
There has been no public comment.
All right, looking back to the commission, we are looking for a motion to recommend approval to the city council for an administrative request for historic design guidelines.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman and Mr. Grimes. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Snare,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Mr. Way,
Yes.
Ms. Call.
Yes. Thank you very much. And again, I know that Mr. Way and I just hit on it, but please pass along our thanks to all who were involved in that project.
We certainly will. I know a lot of people in the community have put their heart and soul into that, and we're glad that you have also had your opportunity to make it better, because I really think it has become a lot better. So thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. All right, Jenny, it looks like you have some training for us this evening on the Dublin Corporate Area Plan.
Good evening, everyone. We included in your packet, and I have a presentation here that I'll go through, and I will put it also in your materials for reference after this in case you want to look at the graphics and see those. But we included the Dublin Corporate Area Plan in your packet for you to just take a look at, just to familiarize yourself with that. And then, like I said, I'm going to go through the details of that. We really wanted to try to focus on, as part of your training goals, looking at different areas around the city and how that compares, and how we use the community plan and what these special area plans mean. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to give a little overview of that, but really dive into the Dublin Corporate Area Plan, because you're going to be seeing some proposed code and guidelines and area rezoning related to that here in the near future. So we thought it would be a good chance to talk that through with all of you. So with that, I will, unless anybody has any initial questions, I will share screen here. Okay, can everybody see that okay? So tonight, like I mentioned, I'm going to just talk briefly about the area plan and how it fits within the community plan, give some background about the Dublin Corporate Area Plan, or DCAP as we call it, and then talk through the plan recommendation for the first two phases, and then how that, the next steps of that, and what will be coming forward for you all to review. And I'll obviously, and if you have any questions along the way, just let me know. And Rebecca, you might have to, I can only see a couple of you, so please somebody say something or just speak out if you have a question. So in terms of the planning process, as I mentioned, I really wanted to talk through, and I don't want to insult your intelligence, but just assuming that we'll sort of start at a baseline. So obviously the city has a community plan that looks at, it's our really our big policy, our guiding document that helps inform how we're going to grow, where we're going to grow, what those development decisions might be, and provides within it then in certain areas, special area plans that provide this additional level of detail that really help give specific policy direction for a geographic area. So the Dublin Corporate Area Plan is one of those specific areas. And then obviously then zoning accompanies that, and that's really the legal mechanism that we use to, govern our land use development. So that's what will come before you in terms of next steps for this. So the plan for DCAP has been adopted, and then we're looking at how we're going to implement those plan recommendations through the zoning code requirements. So I wanted to share just some graphics that are on our website. If you go to the city's website, at the very top, there's like a little toolbar and it has community plans. So you can get on there and click around on certain things just to sort of see how it's laid out. It isn't only a web-based form. We don't have a printed out version we used to in the past, but given the digital nature of the world, we went to a digital version a couple of years ago. So it's really interactive, and you can click on certain items and learn more. So you can see on the screen, so on the left-hand side, obviously chapters, and if you clicked on those, you would see every community plan chapter. You see then the special area plans, future land use map, thoroughfare plan, and then any other updates that are included in that. So tonight, again, we're specifically talking about the special area plans, which if you are in that, you will then see this map to the right that has different areas highlighted within the city and how those area plans are laid out within the community. You can click on those and they have very specific recommendations. So DCAP is one of those particular areas, which is highlighted here then in yellow. Animated mine. I'm sorry about that. So in terms of economic development districts, the city is really broken down into these various neighborhoods that our economic development group focuses on, and they have different staff members that are assigned to those. And within the DCAP area, the Metro Office District and the Blazer Research District, as well as a portion of that Emerald Corporate District, are all included in this area plan. So we really were looking at, the business districts and how we can help those be more clearly aligned for development and redevelopment for future growth, as well as infill. But then also, how do we make sure that we are being considerate of existing and surrounding uses? So this was a really unique area for us to dive into and look at as part of this DCAP plan. So the goals of this, really looking at how do we reposition our legacy office. So the DCAP area has a lot of office sites that could use some reinvestment and new investment in existing buildings. We really wanted to look at, from a plan perspective, of how do we create this environment that maintains that important office component, but looks at the addition of other uses and a walkable environment that gives a little refresh to this area and infill to support those existing office uses, and also looking at how we can make sure that we're looking at any unidentified markets, determining where new investment can happen, and really making sure, sorry about that, that we have the tools then in place from a zoning perspective to help make that implementation successful. And again, looking at making sure that any of the code and site guidelines are going to be compatible with surrounding uses. So it all, again, fits together as part of a piece of the puzzle. So the zoning portion of this is obviously another piece of that. So the area plan for this calls out how we would address zoning going forward. But as you can see on this map, this shows what the existing zoning is for that. And again, you're not really necessarily need to know what all the zoning is, but you can definitely see that there is a variety in there, and it's very inconsistent in terms of what the rules and requirements are. So one of the big roles and goals of the DCAP was to consolidate that and look at how do we make these standards much more cohesive so that the development within this area would then reflect that. So within the Dublin Corporate Area Plan, there were identified 4 districts which have the name of a mixed use regional district. So again, that's looking at how to have this employment areas with complementary uses for retail and commercial, as well as supporting for residential and recreational uses, and putting all those pieces together. And how do we find the perfect locations for those and infill where it's appropriate. So the map on the right here shows then the various we call MUR districts. So the Metro Blazer area is here in the northern section. That's MUR 1. Then you have the MUR 2, which is Tuttle Road, and there's also that's this area here in the center. MUR 3 then is on the other side of 270. That is the Emerald area. And then MUR 4 is the area that is on the far right-hand side, which is the Llewellyn Farms office. So really trying to consolidate these into 4 districts so they have, again, cohesive requirements and recommendations, but each of them is obviously a little bit unique given their existing character and surrounding site character. So we want to make sure that we're addressing all those appropriately. Again, this just gives you a little more zoomed in version just so that you can see how all those fit together. So we're really looking at the area that is south of West Bridge Street, France Road, with a little bit of the area on the west side of France, and then portions south of, or excuse me, along Tuttle Boulevard, and then all the way over to Emerald Parkway. So it encompasses a pretty large area that you can see, but really, again, wanting to look at this really comprehensively and determine what the best movement forward is for supporting the existing uses there. And within the plan, if you had a chance to look at it, you'll see that it talks through building height guidelines. So again, depending on location, the building heights would be identified, again, to be compatible with surrounding uses, existing buildings, and how would we envision those moving forward? What would those building height guidelines be? So that's the map that's on the right, or excuse me, on the left-hand side, that's in the various blue shades. And then to the right there were specific sites that are undeveloped that in the plan, there were additional, more site-specific or focused look at what would be the most appropriate uses for those. And the plan gave guidelines and recommendations for how those would be. So in the plan that you have in your packet, you can look at those specifically numbered sites, and then there is a little explanation about what's there and what could be seen there in the future as part of that. And I'm happy to talk through any of those if you have any questions about that.
Just very quickly, Jenny.
Sure.
On 8 on that previous screen, is 8 still underdeveloped with that new hotel going up?
So the back portion, so the portion that's furthest to the west, that has been partially developed. There's a portion along France Road that is currently undeveloped.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of phasing, when the plan was approved, which was approved in 2018, City Council provided staff with direction about how to move forward with the implementation of developing the zoning code and the guidelines for the entire plan. Again, looking at the area, obviously it's a pretty large area, so we want to break it down into manageable chunks. So City Council's direction was to focus on so phase 1 is that MUR 4 district. So that's the area that is located on the east side of France Road, adjacent to Llewellyn Farms. So there is some existing office and commercial buildings within there, and looking at the code for that particular area. And then the second phase is the Metro Blazer area, which is that olive green color towards the top part of the screen. So those two were the phases that they asked us to look into further and bring those forth in a more timely manner, with then future research needing to be done for the MUR 2 and 3 districts. Again, a lot of those have planned unit developments within them. So that would require additional research and understanding of how the proposed modifications would in the code and adding those to the code would be handled. So again, not that that can't be done, but just wanting to make sure we're focusing on these first 2 phases and then would determine how to move forward with MUR 2 and 3 following those. So for phase 1 in particular, that's the Llewellyn Farms office area. And again, if you reviewed the document, it really talks about how the development within this area, again, is very proximate to residential neighborhoods, particularly on the east side, and how development is sensitively located as part of any redevelopment or infill development along that area. So really looking at how that would be developed in the future. And you'll see the other recommendations here talk about a lower density, that the building heights would be limited, and then setbacks and buffers being augmented to help, mitigate, allow for redevelopment, but make sure we're mitigating any potential conflicts with the residential neighborhood. So, and when you see the code come forward with that, you will see additional restrictions within there that help to achieve those goals and recommendations that are part of the plan. And then the second phase is MUR1, which is that Metro Blazer area. So that's really focused on that legacy office. There's a lot of opportunities for reinvestment and a couple infill parcels that are within that area. It's really a large office employment center and has really good access, obviously, from 270 and 33 with France Road frontage. So there's a lot of opportunities for reinvestment within this area. But then also the plan looks at, making sure that you're providing an opportunity for a mix of uses. So currently it's very office oriented and service oriented, but there is potential for residential to be included within that phase 2, as well as looking at more service retail and how that is accommodated as well. So office users would have the benefit of being proximate to services that they can use throughout the day when they're at work. And then obviously the provision of residential within that area would be a good fit in that you could live and work in a very close proximity to each other. So going back to that planning process at the beginning, when we look back at the area plan, then obviously the next step is the zoning piece of this and how do we bring that forward to the commission. And so we're really looking at with the proposed code for those first 2 phases, obviously similar to what we've talked about for the historic district, and that we look at every time we're together, those site development standards, materials, access, parking, open space, landscaping. So this new code that will be used to implement the DCAP will address all of those areas, either within the code itself or within the design guidelines that are accompanying this. Again, so we're really looking at this in a comprehensive way. So you will see when we bring this forward, this is an entirely new section of our zoning code. So we will be adding, it'll look in our mind very similar to West Innovation, where it's its own standalone district within the code. So you'll be able to see all those pieces, and similar to Bridge Street as well, where all the pieces and parts will be together in one area to make it easier for the user as they're bringing development forth, that they'll know where to look and how to find the requirements for that. So the next steps for this will be for us to bring the MUR4 code and guidelines and rezoning forward. That's that Llewellyn Farms area. So that will be the first piece that you will see. We've done a lot of legwork with this area and overall with the DCAP, lots of public engagement, resident engagement, and working with the business owners to making sure that we're addressing all their concerns. So you'll see that section first, and then shortly after, then we'll be bringing forward the MUR1, which is that Metro Blazer, because we want to make sure that that section is moving forward as well. So that's all I have in terms of presentation. Sorry, that was a lot of information, but I just wanted to make sure that you're all a little keyed into what's happening, what we've approved, and where we're going next. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have or clarify anything.
So looking to the commission, any questions?
It's a lot, Jenny.
Yeah, again, this is one of the ones where you can just see, as you turn through the pages, the hours that went into the preparation. And so, better thee than me. We certainly appreciate the efforts that go into things like this. And I'm sure that over time, especially as we see applications that are in these relative areas, that we will be pouring through the pages and appreciating the efforts as these applications come through time and time again. So thank you.
Indeed.
Great, thank you. I can take zero credit for this. So this was very much Tammy and Debiani and Vince. The implementation part's where we are now. So, but I agree, it was a lot of great work and from our residents to participating corporate and residential. It's been a good group effort. So we'll make sure as we're bringing the code forward that we're providing explanation about how that meets the plan. And if there's any areas of deviation, we'll make sure we point those out so we can talk through whether that's appropriate or not as this.
That sounds great. Thank you, Jenny.
Sure.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're at that portion of our agenda for communications. I have a couple of items tonight. The first one is we've seen the menu boards like the Burger King consent agenda item today a few times. And I know that historically we hadn't permitted, and so therefore that came through. Is there desire among the Planning Commission, among staff, to see if this could be specifically staff-oriented administrative approval in the future, rather than each one coming to us as a consent agenda item, delaying the applicant for something that, given the parameters and given the code compliance, we say yes to? So I'm seeing head nods among the commission. Jenny, can you speak to any requirement as to why it wouldn't?
I think the challenge for us, I mean, again, we're all for making this as simple and clear for everyone. So I think if you'll allow us, I'd like to talk to Thad, and maybe doesn't have an answer today, because a lot of these are within a planned unit development, and those standards may be different depending on the development. So if there's a way we could do that cohesively, I definitely would like to look into that, so we could be clear about that. I just don't know if we can categorically change the code to address that, but we can definitely talk about it and see if there's a way. Thad, do you have any initial thoughts? I don't want to totally put you on the spot here.
Yeah, I think that the main complicating factor is the PUD, but I think that for straight zoning and for our sign code, because many of our PUDs do reference the sign code at 153066, perhaps that might be the ticket to doing it, and that would get maybe 75% of what we're looking to cover.
Thank you. At least if there's some investigation. And again, if you go back and say, hey, no, we don't think this is a good idea for X, Y, and Z reason, of course, we want to entertain that. But when we see things repeatedly, especially if there's no discussion on the items, then, at least entertaining the option of the process changing to facilitate, of course, better communication and better service for those businesses, as well as respecting your time and respecting the applicant's time in that process.
Absolutely. I will commit to looking into that and getting back to you all with an answer.
Thank you. And then just one item for everyone's reference. We had a resident who passed away recently, who had connections with the Planning and Zoning Department. And so I just wanted to highlight, I never met Gary myself, but wanted to highlight his service to the city. Gary Gunderman passed away just recently, and I believe he was in the city of Dublin somewhere between, 2000, early 2000s and 2015 is when he retired, and just passed away, last week before last, I believe is when that happened. So everyone who called him friend, we certainly, our condolences for your loss. To Chris, his wife, our condolences. And Chris is going to be donating 400 tulip bulbs to the city for planting in Gary's name. She also reached out to me and said that she is establishing or working with a fund to provide some training opportunities, some funds for some training opportunities. So as there is more information on that, I will make sure that Planning and Zoning has that information. But at this time, just if everyone could keep your thoughts with Chris and reflect on Gary's contribution to the city of Dublin, it would certainly be appreciated. And to those of you, again, Warren, I'm sure you knew Gary. And so Jenny, I know you knew him because I saw your endorsement on LinkedIn. And so again, anyone who knew him, our condolences with you.
Thank you, and I'll share that with Chris. I know she will appreciate that. Yes, Gary we worked together for quite some time, and he left a very, very great impression on all of us. So sad to lose him. So I appreciate you highlighting that.
Any other communications that we have for this evening?
The only other thing I can think of, and Nikki, feel free to chime in if you have something. We have confirmed our training date. For, again, the majority of everyone could meet on May the 17th. So we're going to do our board and commission training at 6:30, and Nikki will send out a meeting WebEx appointment for that. Unfortunately, we're still virtual, but that'll be happening on the May 17th. And if you're the chair or vice chair, we'll be doing a little bit of extra training ahead of that, just amongst you all. So you should have a separate appointment for that. If anybody has any questions, definitely reach out ahead of time. That meeting will be facilitated by Greg Dale, who helps us with our training. We're going to look at it and just make sure we're touching on all the things that you all have raised to make sure that we're providing you the best background and information to do your jobs well. And I've lost it, so. Oh, it'll be live stream. So if you can't attend, then you'll be able to see the discussion afterwards. So I know some people have a conflict, which I apologize. We can't make it work for everybody, but have the benefit of watching it afterwards. Nikki, do you have anything else?
I don't. Nope, I think that's it.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending another Thursday evening with us. Staff, thank you for these evening meetings. Obviously, we appreciate the sacrifice and recognize the sacrifice that goes into contributing to all that you do for the city of Dublin. So until next time, good night, everybody.
Happy Mother's Day,
everyone.
Thank you.
Happy Mother's Day.